So it's the Christmas season, right? Here we are, first Sunday in Advent. Sanctuary is beautifully decorated. First of the Advent candles is lit. We've just heard some wonderful Christmas music. All of this as a reminder, just in case you maybe didn't notice, Christmas is just 3 weeks away. 23 days, if we were told. And then we have today's gospel from Luke. Because what says Christmas better than hearing about the apocalypse? Signs in the sky and distress among nations. People filled with fear and foreboding, topped off with Christmas, or rather with Jesus arriving on a cloud. What says Christmas better than that? Ho, ho, ho. You know, when you look at this reading, I did anyway, and you think, man, was Stephen King picking the scripture readings this week? How does this fit in? What does this have to do with Advent? Christmas is coming. We should be reading gospel passages about Mary and Joseph and mangers and little drummer boys and reindeer. All those things that are in the Bible. Should have got a bigger laugh. But we should be reading about Christmas things and real Christmas things, and instead we get Jesus coming at us out of the cloud. Like Google Docs and Pinterest documents. Only scarier. Why this reading? Why today? You think about it a little more, and you maybe come to think that maybe it's not that weird. Because what Luke is talking about, or anyway what Luke reports Jesus was talking about, was really another Advent, wasn't it? Because if we think of Advent as that period of waiting and anticipation in the birth of the birth of Jesus, which is what Advent is, Advent is our remembrance of the generations of faithful who waited for their long-expected Savior to arrive. Advent is our recapitulating that time before Jesus arrived, when the faithful waited and wondered for all of those generations. When is it going to happen? And every time some messianic figure would surface, some promising prophet, the faithful would ask themselves, is this the one we've been told to wait for? And up until Jesus' time, the answer was no, that's not the one. So what Luke is writing about here, what Jesus is talking about here, is that period of watchful, faithful waiting before Jesus makes his return. So it is an Advent of sorts. It's a second Advent. It's a period when faith must trump reason and hope must hold despair at bay, knowing that God has promised, or in this case that Jesus has promised, that he would return. So I guess you can make a decent argument, at least, that it is an appropriate reading for the beginning of Advent, even if it's not as warm and fuzzy as some of the other gospel readings about the Nativity might be. Because it allows us to mirror that pre-Jesus wait. When we're just waiting, knowing he's going to come, but we don't know when. And it's a reminder that whatever else we might think, however wise we might think we are, we have absolutely no idea of when that wait will come to an end. We have only the promise and the knowledge that it will end one day when Jesus returns. And that brings me around to one particular word, a word I used earlier. Because as Luke records it, Jesus said, when all of these things have happened, they will see the Son of Man coming on a cloud. Apart from being a heck of an entrance, that phrase, coming on a cloud, also has some interesting connotations to it. There was a movie a few years ago where one of the characters, who was trying to understand how something ended up getting uploaded accidentally and then distributed over the web, exclaims, "Nobody understands the cloud. We use the term, but we don't know what it is." And I think that's appropriate here, because one way to look at what we read about Jesus' arrival tells us that it's going to be cloaked in mystery. There is uncertainty to it. A little bit of physics here. I know nothing says fun on a rainy Sunday like physics does. But 115 years ago, a doctor by the name of H. Nagaoka, who worked at the Imperial University of Tokyo, postulated the familiar Saturnian model of atoms. It's the one we learned in school, where you have the nucleus in the middle, and then you have the electrons that orbit the nucleus, and it kind of looks like moons orbiting a planet. It's all very stately and organized. But 20 years later, Dr. Heisenberg came along and he kicked that model over and he said, that's not the way it is at all. It doesn't look anything like that. And he made his postulation about atoms based on the idea of uncertainty, which came out of quantum mechanics. Because he realized that there was no way you could know where any particle was at any given time unless you actually looked. It was not predictable. So the only model of an atom that actually made sense, according to him, was one where the atom existed as this sort of cloud of possibilities. This mysterious cloud of what might be, until it was actually observed. And that's when you knew what was there. So if we take that idea and we join it to what we know about Jesus, or even what we know about God, we find that maybe the things that they talk about happening are actually these mysterious, unknowable clouds of possibility until they actually happen, until we actually see them in this world. Thus, Jesus' return is this unknowable quantum state of affairs until he actually comes back. Elsewhere in the Gospels, when God is interacting with people directly, that happens out of a cloud. God speaks to people out of a cloud. When the transfiguration happens, there's this cloud that's there. In fact, the word that is used here for cloud is Greek. It's Nephili. That word is used 15 times in the Gospels, and there's only one time when it's used to mean that white fluffy thing up in the sky. Every other time it's used to take and represent words from God or events that we can't understand until they actually happen. So in a sense, what Jesus is saying is, this is going to happen. But don't try to figure out the details, because you won't know until it does. We can burn up an awful lot of time trying to match up prophecy and events in the world and signs in the sky and all of that kind of stuff. when you come down to it, it's a mystery that is not meant to be interpreted and understood. Not to the extent that we can put a timetable together. Jesus tells us we're never going to be able to look at the signs and the things happening around us and say, okay, Google Calendar, next Tuesday, mark it, end of world. Not going to happen. Instead, Jesus says, don't worry about the details. Don't worry about when exactly I am coming. What exactly that will look like. Trust me, you'll know it when it happens. Don't get distracted by these things. Don't get distracted by what's going on around you. Don't get weighed down by the things of the earth. Instead, and he says it, verse 28, instead he says, stand up and lift up your heads. I think that's the central message here. Don't go through life like this. Don't go through life bowed down and waiting for life to happen. Don't go through life bowed down and waiting for the end to come. Stand up. Lift your heads. Look around. Jesus says, lift up your heads. There is a world around you that needs your particular gifts. There's a world around you that needs compassion and healing. There's a world that needs help now, not in some far-off future, not in some indeterminate future, but it needs help now. Don't put it off. Jesus basically says, don't wait for me to come back and pull things together for you. Don't wait for me to come back and share God's kingdom with this broken world, because that's why I chose you as followers. That's why I gave you those very special gifts that you have. That's why I showed you what a difference a servant heart could make in this world. Jesus said to his followers, while you wait for me, the world is waiting for you. So lift up your heads. Look around and see what I want you to see. So when you think about it, maybe this idea of a second advent, it's not about us waiting for Jesus to return, exactly. But it's about the world waiting for us to show it what the kingdom of God looks like. Just as Jesus came so many years ago and he showed the world a very different view of the kingdom of God other than what they had expected. During this time of waiting, it is our turn to show them a different way of looking at things. We live between two advents. One has happened, one is coming. It's our job to show people what this one can mean when it comes.